Disturbing things from police interrogations. Vulner 1. Unsolved cases and strange confessions that will haunt you. The night has fallen. Here, fear is real and the inexplicable rules. I am Yoon-Jin Lee, your companion on this journey through the darkest mysteries. This channel does not bring ordinary stories. It brings echoes, scars, and truths that no one dares to tell. If you feel chills when searching for answers, you are in the right place. Turn off the light. Close the door. We will face the unknown, because here, fear is only the beginning. Before we begin, I want to thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with me in the darkness. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. What you're about to hear comes directly from the archived interrogation records and police files that most agencies prefer to keep buried. These are not dramatized accounts. These are the actual confessions, contradictions, and disturbing admissions that haunt the detectives who recorded them. Some of these cases remain unsolved. Some of these men remain free. Some of these mysteries have never been solved in the decades since these interrogations took place. These are the stories that authorities would prefer you did not hear. These are the confessions that make no sense. These are the cases where everything we know to be true seems to collapse under the weight of the evidence. So, settle in. Keep your phone close. And let's explore what happens when the guilty find themselves face to face with the truth they can no longer escape. What we discover might change the way you see the world around you. What we discover might make you wonder if you are ever truly alone. What we discover, I must warn you, cannot be unheard. Disturbing things from police interrogations. Vulner 1. Case 1. The Hesitation. September 18th, 1987. Detective Michael Hartley sat across from Thomas Eugene Richards in a small gray interrogation room in Akron, Ohio. The case that brought them together would spend the next 38 years locked away in a filing cabinet, rarely discussed, never solved. The interrogation room itself was a standard model for the era. Cinder block walls painted a pale institutional gray, a single metal table bolted to the floor, 2 metal chairs equally bolted to prevent prisoners from using them as weapons. There was a single light fixture mounted on the ceiling, fluorescent and unforgiving. There was a 2-way mirror on one wall, where supervisors and other detectives could observe without being seen. The room smelled of industrial cleaning solution, and something else, the accumulated presence of countless guilty and innocent people who had sat in this exact room, confessing or denying, lying or telling the truth. Thomas Eugene Richards was 32 years old. He had worked as a mail carrier for 9 years. His colleagues knew him as quiet, reliable, and utterly forgettable. The kind of man who would vanish into any crowd, leaving no impression whatsoever. He had never been in trouble with the law. He had no criminal record. His school reports from childhood indicated that he was a well-behaved student, though somewhat withdrawn. His teachers from high school described him as quiet, but respectful. His employers at the Postal Service described him as reliable and punctual, though he rarely socialized with coworkers. In every measurable way, Thomas Eugene Richards was the kind of man that civilized society barely noticed. He was a ghost who walked among the living, invisible, because he had learned, at some very early point in his existence, how to be unremarkable. What Thomas Eugene Richards did not mention to most people was what he did with his free time. On the morning of September 16th, 1987, the body of Patricia Hoffman was discovered in the basement of an apartment building in downtown Akron. She was 28 years old. She had been reported missing 2 days earlier by her sister, who had become concerned when Patricia did not show up for work on Thursday morning and did not call in sick. When forensic technicians arrived at the scene, they discovered that Patricia had not simply been murdered. There were signs that suggested extended confinement. There were marks on the concrete floor indicating where a person's body had been positioned for an extended period of time. There were scratches on her fingertips and on her palm, as if she had been desperately trying to reach something just beyond her grasp. Possibly a door, possibly a window, possibly help that had never come. The discovery at the scene that most disturbed the investigators was not the body itself, but rather what lay beside it. In a metal toolbox, placed carefully next to Patricia's remains, investigators found 7 photographs. The photographs appeared to document different women, all photographed in the same basement, all appearing to be unconscious or heavily sedated. The dates on the back of the photographs ranged from July of 1985 to July of 1987, spanning a period of exactly 2 years. In the margins of some photographs there were handwritten notes. The notes contained descriptions of the women. The notes contained what appeared to be medical information. The notes contained dates and times. The notes contained phrases that seemed almost clinical in their detachment. Subject still sleeping. No reaction to stimuli. Breathing steady. Temperature stable. None of the women in those photographs had ever been reported missing. This was the crucial detail that made the photographs so terrifying. These were photographs of 7 women who appeared to have been held captive, drugged, and potentially murdered, yet none of them had ever been reported missing. No families were frantically searching for them. No police reports existed. No missing person posters had been created. These 7 women had simply vanished from the world as if they had never existed, and no one had noticed. Thomas Eugene Richards came to the attention of authorities through an extraordinarily mundane route. Patricia's apartment contained her personal diary. In it, scattered across several entries, were mentions of a man she had met at a coffee shop. She referred to him only as Tom. She had written that Tom had offered to help her move boxes from her apartment. She had written that she thought Tom was pleasant, but perhaps a bit too interested in learning about her daily routines. She had written that she had given Tom her address. She had written that she had given him detailed information about her schedule, mentioning that she worked mornings, and that Fridays were her day off. She had written that she thought it was nice that he seemed so interested in her life. She had written, in her final entry, that Tom was supposed to arrive that Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. When detectives cross-referenced mail carrier routes in Akron, they discovered that Thomas Eugene Richards had a route that passed directly by Patricia's apartment building. They discovered that he had been seen in the neighborhood numerous times by various witnesses. They discovered that he had access to keys that could open mailboxes throughout the city, keys that had not been officially monitored or tracked. They discovered, through interviews with neighbors, that Thomas had indeed been seen entering the apartment building on the afternoon of Friday, September 14th, at 2:17 in the afternoon. They discovered that he had emerged from the building 1 hour and 34 minutes later, at 3:51 in the afternoon. They discovered that his manner during this exit had seemed normal, nothing unusual, according to one witness. They discovered that he had then walked calmly to his mail truck and driven away. They had brought him in for questioning on the evening of September 18th, 3 days after Patricia's body had been discovered. The interrogation room recording begins with the sound of a metal chair scraping against tile. The sound itself is harsh and jarring, the kind of sound that would put any person on edge. Detective Hartley sits down across from Thomas. Thomas is wearing a gray jumpsuit and a confused expression. His hands are folded on the table in front of him. His eyes are directed downward, focused on his own hands. He is not trembling. He is not sweating. He appears almost bored, as if this entire situation is an inconvenience rather than a matter of life and death. "Thomas?" Detective Hartley begins, his voice calm and measured, the voice of a man who has done this many times before and knows exactly how to construct a narrative of guilt. "We've found some things that concern us." Thomas nods slightly, but does not speak. The silence extends for approximately 3 seconds. 3 seconds might not seem like much, but in an interrogation room, 3 seconds of silence can feel like an eternity. "We found Patricia Hoffman's diary, Thomas. She mentions someone named Tom. She mentions that Tom was coming to help her move boxes. Do you know Patricia Hoffman?" There is a pause. The pause lasts for 7 full seconds. In the recording, you can hear the ambient hum of the building's electrical system. You can hear Detective Hartley breathing. You can hear a phone ringing in a distant part of the police station. You can hear very faintly the sound of traffic outside the building. Finally, Thomas speaks. His voice is soft and completely calm, the voice of someone discussing a topic of no particular consequence. "I might have met her," he says, "at a coffee shop." "At a coffee shop?" Detective Hartley repeats, his voice sharpening slightly, testing the words to see if they will hold under scrutiny. "And what did you talk about?" "She said she was moving boxes. She said she needed help. She seemed nice. I told her that I could help." "Did you help her?" There is another pause. This one lasts for 9 seconds. It is a longer pause than the first pause, which suggests that Thomas is considering his answer more carefully this time. This is the kind of hesitation that a detective learns to recognize as a warning sign, a moment when a suspect is calculating whether the truth or a lie will serve them better. "I went to the building," Thomas says quietly, "but I didn't go to her apartment." Detective Hartley's voice sharpens noticeably. "You didn't go to her apartment? But you admit you went to the building?" "The basement," Thomas says. "I went to the basement." "Why would you go to the basement?" There is a third pause. This is a longer pause than the previous two. It extends to approximately 14 seconds. In the recording, you can hear the sound of what might be Thomas taking a breath. It is a long, slow breath, the kind of breath someone might take before revealing something they have been keeping hidden for a very long time. The building, Thomas says carefully, has a basement. I was interested in the basement. You were interested in the basement, Detective Hartley repeats. Thomas, we found Patricia Hoffman's body in that basement. We found photographs of women in that basement. We have evidence suggesting you were in that building. I'm going to ask you again, and I want you to think very carefully about your answer. Why were you in that basement? There is a pause. And then Thomas does something remarkable. He looks up at Detective Hartley. He makes direct eye contact, and he smiles. The smile lasts for approximately 2 seconds. Then it vanishes. When Thomas speaks again, his voice is exactly the same, but something has changed in his demeanor. The pretense of boredom has dropped away. Something else has taken its place. Something that might be authenticity, or might be something far more sinister. I wanted to see, he says simply. I wanted to see the basement. I wanted to see if it was the right place. The right place for what? For keeping things, Thomas says. For keeping things safe. For keeping things in the dark where they belong. Detective Hartley's voice becomes harder, more aggressive, taking on the tone of a man who has just recognized that he is interrogating someone who is fundamentally different from the standard criminal. Thomas, I want you to listen to me very carefully. We have evidence placing you at the scene. We have Patricia Hoffman identifying you in her diary. We have found your fingerprints on the toolbox containing photographs of 7 other women. I need you to tell me what happened. I need you to tell me the truth. Thomas does not answer immediately. Instead, he looks away from Detective Hartley. He looks toward the corner of the interrogation room, toward a spot where there is nothing but gray painted concrete and shadow. He stares at this empty corner for so long that Detective Hartley repeats his question, his voice now containing a note of frustration, perhaps even fear. What happened, Thomas? When Thomas responds, his voice is different. It is quieter. It contains something that might be regret, or might be something far more disturbing, a kind of resignation, as if Thomas has been waiting his entire life for this moment, waiting to finally confess what he had been doing in the darkness. She screamed, he says. Patricia screamed. She screamed when I showed her the basement. She understood what the basement was for, and she screamed. I didn't want her to scream. What did you do? I asked her to be quiet. I asked her to understand. I asked her to understand what I had created. She did not understand. She kept screaming. So I made her quiet. This is the point in the interrogation recording where Detective Hartley stops asking questions for approximately 43 seconds. The silence in the recording is total. Even the electrical hum of the building seems to cease. The ambient sound from outside seems to vanish. There is nothing in the recording except the presence of 2 men sitting across from each other in a small gray room, one of whom has just casually admitted to murder. Then, very quietly, Detective Hartley speaks. Did you hurt Patricia, Thomas? I gave her something to make her sleep, Thomas says. His voice has returned to its calm, neutral tone. She needed to sleep. She was so frightened. The fear was going to consume her entirely. So I gave her something to quiet her mind, something to make the fear go away. Everyone in the basement needed to sleep. Everyone in the basement needed peace. Everyone? The other women, Thomas says. In the photographs. Where are the other women, Thomas? And this is where the recording becomes genuinely disturbing. Genuinely difficult for anyone listening to comprehend. Thomas does not immediately answer. Instead, he tilts his head slightly, as if listening to something. His eyes move back and forth, as if tracking something invisible moving across the wall, something that only Thomas can see. When he speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper, the voice of someone sharing a secret that they have kept locked away for so long that speaking it aloud feels almost dangerous. They're sleeping, he says. They're all sleeping now, in the right places, where they belong, where they were always meant to be. Where do they belong, Thomas? Where do they sleep? Thomas's head snaps back to center. His eyes focus on Detective Hartley, and he says something that Detective Hartley would later write in his report as one of the most disturbing moments of his entire career, a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Wherever it's dark, Thomas says. Wherever it's very, very dark, where the light has never reached, where the sun cannot find them, that's where they belong now. That's where they will always belong. The interrogation continues for another 78 minutes. During this extended questioning, nothing significant is revealed. Thomas admits to being in the building. He admits to knowing Patricia. He admits that he has, in his words, an interest in basements, and an appreciation for what basements represent. He does not admit to murder. He does not confess to harming any of the women in the photographs. He does not identify any of the 7 other women. He does not explain where they are. He does not reveal any other relevant information. When asked directly if he killed Patricia Hoffman, Thomas says yes, but when asked how, he will not answer. When asked what he injected into her body, he will not answer. When asked where the other women are, he will not answer. When asked why he kept the photographs, he will not answer. When asked if there are other basements, other places, other women who are sleeping in the darkness, he will not answer. Every time a specific question is asked, he simply stares at that empty corner of the interrogation room and says nothing. He is given a lawyer. The lawyer advises him not to answer any more questions. Thomas agrees. The interrogation ends. Thomas Eugene Richards was charged with second-degree murder in the death of Patricia Hoffman. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 years in prison. He served 13 years before being released on parole in the year 2000. Since his release, he has lived in a small town in northern Maine, where he works as a night security guard at a warehouse. He has never married. He has no children. He lives alone in a house with a basement. That basement has never been searched. That basement has never been examined. The 7 women in the photographs have never been identified. The basement where Patricia was found has been thoroughly examined, and no evidence of extended confinement has ever been found. But this absence of evidence is not entirely reassuring, because it is possible that someone cleaned that basement very thoroughly, removing all traces of the crimes that occurred there. It is possible that there were other basements, in other buildings, in other locations throughout Akron, where women were being held in the darkness. The toolbox containing the photographs was never tested for fingerprints because, according to the evidence log, it was misplaced before proper forensic analysis could be conducted. This is a detail that has never been adequately explained. How does a piece of evidence in a murder case simply get misplaced? How does a toolbox containing the only documentation of multiple potential victims simply vanish from a police evidence room? But here is where the case becomes even stranger. In 1995, 4 years before Thomas's parole, a young woman named Sarah Mackenzie came forward to police. Sarah had been living in Akron, Ohio, in 1987. She had no connection to Patricia Hoffman. She had never known Thomas Eugene Richards. She had never reported being missing or harmed, but she had something to tell the investigators. In her testimony, Sarah described waking up in a basement. She described being unable to move her body. She described a sensation of complete paralysis, as if her muscles had been disabled by some external force. She described the sensation of someone standing directly over her, watching her, for hours. She described observing the observer, seeing a figure standing perfectly still in the shadows, simply watching, simply witnessing her helplessness. She described eventually losing consciousness and waking up in her own apartment, in her own bed, with no memory of how she had gotten there. She described being terrified to report it to police because she knew, with absolute certainty, that no one would believe her. She described thinking, for years, that she had hallucinated the entire experience, that it had been a dream or a nightmare, until she saw Thomas Eugene Richards' face in the newspaper. Sarah's testimony was not allowed in court. Thomas's trial had already concluded. Adding new evidence at that late stage would have been improper, but Sarah's account was added to the police file, and when Sarah Mackenzie was compared to the photographs found in the toolbox, she did not match any of them. She was simply another woman who had no explanation for a missing period of time from her life, just another story that did not fit anywhere in the official narrative. In 1998, 3 years after Thomas's release from prison, a letter arrived at the Akron Police Department. The letter was typed on a standard typewriter, unsigned, and anonymous. It contained a single message: "They are all still sleeping, in the dark, in the places where the light has never reached. They are still sleeping, and they are dreaming terrible dreams, and no one will ever wake them up. But soon, new sleepers will join them. Soon, the darkness will have new inhabitants. Soon, all of it will be complete." The letter was never traced. No handwriting analysis was ever conducted. No fingerprints were ever lifted from the envelope. The letter was filed away and eventually lost in the department's archives. Thomas Eugene Richards currently lives alone in a house at the edge of a small town in Maine. His basement has never been searched. Authorities have no legal reason to search it. He has served his sentence. He has been released. He has, as far as the law is concerned, paid his debt to society. And yet, there are 7 women whose families will never know what happened to them. There are 7 women whose names remain unknown. There are 7 women who may or may not be sleeping in the darkness, in places that have yet to be found. But sometimes, people who have visited that town report something strange. They report that on certain nights, when they drive past Thomas's house, they see lights on in the basement windows. They see shadows moving behind those windows. They report hearing, very faintly, the sound of something like footsteps, but slower, as if whoever is walking is moving with great difficulty. They report, in hushed tones, that they have heard something that sounds like breathing, slow and steady, and utterly inhuman. No one has ever investigated these reports. They are considered hearsay. They are considered the product of overactive imaginations and the natural tendency of small towns to generate local legends. No one wants to know the truth. No one wants to imagine what might be in that basement. But this is what makes the case truly disturbing. Thomas Eugene Richards still has access to a basement, and no one is watching. And every night, when the sun goes down, the darkness returns to claim what it has always owned. And somewhere in that darkness, 7 women are sleeping, and they are dreaming terrible dreams, and no one will ever wake them up. Case 2. The Pattern. September 3rd, 1992. Detective Sarah Mitchell sat across from Raymond James Caldwell in an interrogation room in Portland, Maine. The room itself was different from the Akron interrogation room. It was newer, built in 1984, with more modern amenities. The walls were painted a light blue rather than gray, supposedly to be more calming, though the effect was merely to create a different kind of institutional sterility. There was a video camera in the corner of the room, mounted on a metal arm, recording everything that transpired. There was a digital clock on the wall displaying the exact time, a feature that barely existed in interrogation rooms from the 1980s. Raymond was 41 years old. He was a carpenter. He had lived in Portland his entire life. He was married to a woman named Helen. They had been married for 16 years. They had 2 daughters, ages 12 and 14. To everyone who knew him, Raymond James Caldwell was an entirely normal man, perhaps even an exceptionally good one. He was known for his precision and craftsmanship. He was known for his reliability. He was known for coaching youth soccer on weekends, for attending his daughter's school events, for participating in his church. He was a man who seemed to have achieved the American dream in miniature: a stable marriage, healthy children, a respectable career, a house with a mortgage that was being steadily paid down. What Raymond James Caldwell had told his wife was that he was working late on a home renovation project in an old mansion on the outskirts of the city. What Raymond James Caldwell had actually been doing was something else entirely. What Raymond James Caldwell had actually been doing was spending his evenings and nights following women. He had been spending his evenings and nights watching. He had been spending his evenings and nights creating a comprehensive record of his observations. On August 30th, 1992, a young woman named Jennifer Patterson came to the police station with a story that would eventually lead to Raymond's arrest. Jennifer was 23 years old. She worked as a cashier at a grocery store. She was a pleasant young woman, attractive but not strikingly so, the kind of person who would fade into a crowd within moments of leaving. On the evening of August 28th, she said, she had been followed from work. She said the man who followed her had eventually approached her in a parking lot and had asked for directions. She said she had given him directions to be polite, even though she felt uncomfortable with the attention. She said he had offered her a ride. She said she had declined, and he had driven away without incident. But here is what disturbed Jennifer. The man had returned to the same parking lot, at the same time, on August 29th. He had parked in the same spot. He had gotten out of his van. He had walked toward her. And then, when she had moved toward the police station that was adjacent to the parking lot, he had returned to his van and driven away. And again, on August 30th, the man had returned. This time, Jennifer had called the police from the parking lot. By the time officers arrived, the man was gone. But Jennifer gave police a description. Youngish, maybe in his 40s, tall, athletic build, driving a white van. The van had a particular configuration of equipment racks on the roof. The van appeared to be used for work purposes. That was all she could provide. With such a description, police expected the case to go nowhere, or at least to take months of investigation. But then, on September 1st, Jennifer's description was matched to a man named Raymond James Caldwell, who drove a white van registered in his name. A background check revealed that Raymond had no criminal record, but something about the report caught Detective Sarah Mitchell's attention. It was the fact that Raymond had, in 1990, been questioned in connection with the disappearance of a young woman named Caroline Baker. Caroline had vanished from a parking lot near downtown Portland. She had never been found. She had never contacted anyone. She had simply ceased to exist. There had never been enough evidence to charge Raymond. He had been questioned and released. But now, with Jennifer's report, with a pattern of behavior that suggested repeated following and observation, there was enough for a warrant to search Raymond's van and his home. When the search was conducted, the police found something that would lead to one of the most disturbing interrogations in Portland Police Department history. In a hidden compartment beneath the van's rear seat, investigators discovered a leather journal. The journal was well maintained and clearly used frequently. The journal contained entries dating back to 1989, spanning a period of nearly 4 years. The entries documented in meticulous detail information about dozens of women. The entries included their names, their schedules, their work routines, the routes they took to and from their jobs, their shopping patterns, their exercise routes, their favorite restaurants, the times when they were typically alone, the locations where they were most vulnerable. Some entries included crude sketches of locations, parking lots, apartment buildings, hiking trails, grocery stores. Other entries included notes about moments when the women were alone, when they were far from other people, when they were most at risk. Some entries included what appeared to be ratings or assessments of each woman, with comments like, good pattern, same route every day, or unpredictable, too many variables, or perfect isolated, no protection. This was no spontaneous activity. This was no result of momentary impulse. This was a carefully maintained record of obsession and predatory behavior spanning nearly 4 years. This was the documentation of a hunter studying his prey. This was the systematic cataloging of potential victims. Raymond James Caldwell was arrested without incident. He was cooperative. He did not resist. He did not run. He seemed almost resigned to the arrest, as if he had been expecting this moment for some time. He was brought in for questioning. Detective Sarah Mitchell would later describe the moment she walked into the interrogation room as one of the most terrifying moments of her career, despite the fact that she had been a police officer for 15 years and had interrogated numerous dangerous criminals. Because, she would tell a colleague, when I looked at him, I saw nothing. No anger, no fear, no regret. There was simply nothing inside those eyes. It was like looking at a perfect mask of a human being, a simulation of humanity with no actual humanity behind it. The interrogation begins with Detective Mitchell placing the leather journal on the table between herself and Raymond. Raymond looks down at the journal. He does not react. His hands remain folded on the table. His expression does not change. He simply stares at the journal with the same expression a museum visitor might wear while examining a painting. Raymond, Detective Mitchell says, and her voice contains a note of something that might be fear. Can you tell me about this journal? It's mine, Raymond says simply. I wrote it. Can you tell me why you wrote it? Raymond is quiet for a moment. Then he tilts his head slightly, as if considering the question carefully, as if the answer requires a thoughtful exploration rather than a simple statement. I wrote it because I wanted to remember, he says. I wanted to remember them. Remember them how? The way they moved. The way they didn't know I was watching. The way they were real when they thought they were alone. That's when they're most real. When no one is watching. When they think they're safe. In those moments, they're genuine. In those moments, they're not performing. In those moments, they're actually alive. You were watching these women without their knowledge? Yes. The directness of the admission is shocking. Detective Mitchell continues, her voice controlled but with an undercurrent of tension. Can you explain why? Because, Raymond says, and his voice takes on a philosophical tone, as if he is explaining something fundamental and obvious. They're different when they don't know. When someone is aware they're being watched, they change. They become less authentic. They put on the performance of being human. They adjust their behavior. They modify their expressions. They curate their actions. But when they don't know, he pauses. He appears to be searching for the right word, considering multiple options before settling on one that captures his meaning precisely. When they don't know, they become clear. You can see what they really are. You can see past the mask. You can see the truth. What is the truth? What truth do you see? Another pause. In the interrogation recording, you You can hear the ambient sound of the police station around them. Someone is typing at a desk in the distance. A phone is ringing. A radio is emitting static bursts. The sounds of normal human activity, ordinary life, continuing in the world outside this small gray room where a detective is trying to understand the mind of someone who has systematically documented dozens of women as potential victims. "They're empty," Raymond says finally, and his voice contains something that might be pity or might be contempt. "They're all empty inside. They're just performing being full, but there's nothing there. Just hollowness and pretense, and this desperate need to be seen as real by other people. They go through their lives trying to convince everyone, and more importantly themselves, that they have depth and meaning. But when you observe them carefully, when you watch them when they think no one is watching, you see the truth, you see the emptiness. Did you try to take any of these women?" Raymond does not answer immediately. He reaches out his hand toward the journal, as if to touch it, as if to reconnect with the object that contains his most intimate thoughts and observations. But Detective Mitchell slides it away. Raymond's hand drops back to the table. His expression does not change. "I wanted to," he says quietly, and his voice contains something that sounds almost like genuine emotion, something that sounds almost like real disappointment. "But I couldn't. Not because I was afraid of being caught. I've never feared being caught. I've never feared consequences, but because taking them would ruin what I had already done." What would it ruin? The pure observation. The moment when you know everything about a person but they know nothing about you. That moment is perfect. It's the only moment in human interaction that's actually authentic, that's actually real. If I had taken them, the moment would end, the performance would stop, and then I would have to look at them. Actually look at them in their fear and confusion, and see the emptiness. I don't want to see the emptiness in person. The observation is better. The distance is better. This is the point where Detective Mitchell realized that she was not questioning a standard predator or serial killer, but rather someone whose psychology operated according to a completely different system of logic and motivation. Raymond was not interested in possession or control in the traditional sense. He was not driven by sexual desire, or the urge to dominate in the conventional ways. He was driven, apparently, by something far stranger and more incomprehensible. The desire to witness human beings when they thought they were unwatched. The desire to collect observations of human emptiness. The desire to maintain a distance between himself and his subjects, while still maintaining absolute control and knowledge of them. "Raymond, where is Caroline Baker?" Detective Mitchell asks, pressing forward, trying to break through the philosophical framework Raymond had constructed for himself. "The young woman who disappeared in 1990? I don't know. You were questioned in connection with her disappearance." "Yes, but I don't know what happened to her. The last time I saw her was when I followed her from her place of work to a coffee shop. That was on July 15th, 1990. She went into the coffee shop and sat by a window. I watched her from across the street for 2 hours. Then she left. I followed her home. I watched her apartment building, and then I went home myself." "You didn't speak to her?" "No, I never speak to them. That would ruin the observation." "Did you ever, at any point, approach any of these women, other than the incidents we already know about?" Raymond is quiet for a long time. This pause extends beyond 30 seconds. It extends to nearly 50 seconds. When he finally responds, his voice is different. It's quieter. It contains something that might be shame, or might be something far more disturbing, a kind of aesthetic disappointment, as if he is recounting a creative failure. "Once," he says, "one time I approached a woman. She was walking through a parking lot at night. It was dark, and she was alone. I asked her for directions. She gave them. She was so eager to help. She was so desperate to be seen as good, as helpful, as worthy. And I realized, in that moment, that I had made a mistake. A critical mistake." "What mistake?" "I had confirmed what I already suspected. She was empty, completely empty. There was nothing inside her but the desire to appear to be something, to appear to be helpful, to appear to be good. But there was no actual person there. Just a machine performing helpfulness. Just a program running the routine of being a good person. And I realized that all of them were like that. All of them. Empty. Performing the role of being human without any actual humanity. How did that make you feel?" "Empty," Raymond says. "It made me feel empty too. So I decided never to speak to any of them again. The observation, the pure observation, the watching from a distance, that was the only thing that made me feel like I was connected to something real. and then I had ruined it by making contact, by trying to interact with one of them directly. I had destroyed the purity of the observation. But you continued to watch women? Yes, I continued to watch, but I became more careful. I became more selective. I sought out women who seemed more resistant, more likely to maintain the performance even when they were alone. Women who, even in their solitude, were performing. Women who, even when no one was watching, were curating their actions and thoughts. Those women were the most interesting. Those women were the closest to being real. The interrogation continues for 6 hours. In the recording, which is available in the Portland Police Department's archives, Raymond provides astonishingly detailed information about his obsessive watching. He admits to following 63 different women over a period of 4 years. He provides specific names, specific dates, specific locations. He provides information about their patterns and routines that only someone who had spent considerable time observing them would know. But he maintains with absolute consistency that he has never actually harmed any of them. He has never approached any of them. With the exception of the one parking lot incident and the incident with Jennifer Patterson, he has never attempted to kidnap any of them. He has never murdered any of them. He has simply watched. He has simply observed. He has simply documented their emptiness. But then, toward the end of the interrogation, Detective Mitchell asks a question that seems almost casual in its phrasing, though there is nothing casual about it. Raymond, do you watch anyone else? Anyone besides women? Raymond's entire demeanor changes. It's subtle, but it's noticeable. His shoulders tense slightly. His breathing becomes more shallow and quick. His eyes dart toward the video camera in the corner of the room. When he speaks, his voice is different. It's less controlled. It contains a crack of something that might be anxiety, or might be fear. What do you mean? He asks. You heard me. Do you watch anyone else? Anyone besides women? There's someone, but it's different. Different how? Because, Raymond says slowly, and his voice drops to barely above a whisper. He's watching too. Detective Mitchell leans forward. Who is watching, Raymond? I don't know his name, but I've seen him. I've seen him watching, in the same places where I watch. We've never spoken. We've never made eye contact, but I know he's there, and sometimes I wonder if he's watching the same women, or if he's watching me. At this point in the interrogation, Detective Mitchell makes a decision that is not recorded on the official interrogation tape. She stops the recording. She speaks with Raymond off-record for approximately 38 minutes. The exact content of this conversation is not documented anywhere, but when the recording resumes, Detective Mitchell's demeanor has changed. She appears shaken. She appears frightened. Her hands are trembling slightly. Her voice has lost its confident control. Raymond, she says, and her voice is careful, measured, as if she is trying to maintain control of a situation that is rapidly spiraling away from her. I'm going to ask you one more question, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you ever seen this other man watching me? There is a pause, and then Raymond smiles. It's a small smile, but it's genuine. It's the only moment in the entire interrogation where his facial expression changes in any significant way. It's the only moment where something like an actual emotion appears in his eyes. He's very interested in people who investigate, Raymond says. He watches them. He watches how they move. He watches what they do when they're alone. He watches you, Detective Mitchell, at least twice a week, usually on the evenings when you're leaving the station, sometimes earlier in the morning when you're arriving. He watches from across the street. He watches you walk to your car. He watches you drive away. He watches your car disappear into traffic. And then he writes things down in a notebook. He documents you. Just like I document the women. Detective Sarah Mitchell ends the interrogation immediately. She does not complete the standard questioning protocol. She does not ask any clarifying follow-up questions. She does not request more information. She simply stands up, leaves the room, and does not return. Raymond James Caldwell is convicted of stalking and placed on a domestic violence restraining order. He is not convicted of any violent crime because no violent crime can be proven. There is no body. There is no victim who will testify that he has harmed them. The photographs in his journal are not crimes in themselves. The observation is not illegal. He serves 2 years in a county jail and is released. Upon his release, he is placed on the sexual offender registry, though he has committed no sexual crime. He is ordered to attend psychological counseling, which he does, but the counselor who meets with him will later describe the sessions as entirely useless. because Raymond simply repeats the same statements about the hollowness of human beings and the authenticity of observation. Raymond James Caldwell currently lives in a small apartment in Portland, Maine. He is employed as a night watchman at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. People who have encountered him since his release describe him as polite and utterly unremarkable. People who know the details of his case often take a different route to their cars after leaving work. They do not like the feeling of being watched. They do not like knowing that Raymond is still out there. They do not like wondering if he's watching them. But here is what truly disturbs the detectives who worked this case. After Detective Sarah Mitchell ended the interrogation, she requested to speak with the other officers who had brought Raymond in. She asked them if they had, at any point, noticed being followed. 2 of the 3 officers said yes. They said they had noticed the same white van in different locations. They said they had seen the same figure watching them from across parking lots. They said they had all become convinced, without being able to prove it, that they had been under observation themselves, by someone other than Raymond, by someone that Raymond had mentioned, by someone that Raymond referred to as he. Detective Sarah Mitchell requested a transfer out of Portland that same month. She asked to be relocated to a division in western Maine, in the mountains, far away from the city where Raymond lived, and watched and documented. She asked to be transferred to a location where there were fewer people to observe. She asked to be transferred to a place where she might have a chance of not being watched. She was granted the transfer. She was relocated to a small town called Rumford, Maine, in Oxford County. She was assigned to a division that covered a much smaller area. She was working a position that paid less and had fewer advancement opportunities. She accepted all of these downgrades without complaint. She accepted them because she knew something that she could never prove. She knew with absolute certainty that she had been marked by the he that Raymond had mentioned. She had been observed. She had been documented. She had been added to a list. She retired from the police force in 1997, just 5 years after the Raymond Caldwell interrogation. She was only 49 years old, early for retirement, but she left without hesitation. She left Portland. She left Maine entirely. She moved to New Hampshire, to a rural area near the White Mountains. She bought a small house. She had no contact with any of her former colleagues. She did not keep in touch with the police department where she had served for 15 years. She simply vanished from that life. In 1999, 7 years after Raymond's arrest, 2 men and 1 woman were attacked in the parking lot behind the police station in Portland. All 3 were off-duty officers. All 3 were brutally assaulted. The attack was vicious and focused. None of them saw their attacker clearly. All 3 described the sensation of being lifted and thrown against a wall with extraordinary force before being repeatedly struck. When officers arrived at the scene in response to emergency calls, the attacker had vanished. There were no leads. There were no witnesses. There were no clear motives. The attacker left no evidence behind. The case was never solved. The attacker was never found. The case file contains a single note, written by a detective who has since died, possibly connected to Caldwell's surveillance case, possibly revenge assault, possibly indicating associate or copycat. Recommend increased patrols. Recommend investigating possibility of secondary subject operating in area. Recommend extreme caution with interrogations related to surveillance or observation. Raymond James Caldwell was questioned in connection with these attacks. He had an alibi. He had been at his warehouse job, working the night shift. There were security camera recordings confirming his presence. He was released. But the note in the file suggests that investigators suspected Raymond knew who the attacker was. But Raymond would not provide any information. Raymond would not identify his mysterious observer. Raymond would not break the code of silence that seemed to exist between them. Detective Sarah Mitchell, who was living in New Hampshire at that time, reportedly became extremely agitated when she heard about the assault. She made several phone calls to the Portland Police Department. The exact content of these calls is not documented, but according to her sister, Detective Mitchell became convinced that she was next. According to her sister, Detective Mitchell believed that the attacks on the police officers were a warning. She believed that she had been marked. She believed that the figure that Raymond had mentioned, the he that had been watching Raymond and the detectives, was now preparing to move against her. According to her sister, Detective Mitchell stopped leaving her house alone. She took early morning walks only with her sister. She refused to go anywhere at night. She had cameras installed outside her house. She had motion sensor lights installed. According to her sister, Detective Mitchell kept a loaded gun on her nightstand and a knife in her kitchen drawer. She locked every door and every window. She had her sister stay with her for weeks at a time. She was, in short, living in a state of absolute terror, convinced that she was being watched, convinced that she was being targeted, convinced that it was only a matter of time before the he that Raymond had mentioned came for her. Detective Mitchell died in 2003. The official cause was a stroke. She was 59 years old. She had never married. She had no children. She had spent the last 4 years of her life living in complete terror, convinced that she was being watched, convinced, perhaps, that Raymond James Caldwell's other observer, the one who was watching both Raymond and the detectives, was waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves, waiting for the right moment to complete whatever unknown plan they had been formulating, waiting for the right moment to make their presence known. And sometimes, people who knew Detective Mitchell reported that in the weeks before her death, she had seemed to be expecting something. She had seemed to be waiting for something. She had seemed, in her final days, to be listening to something that no one else could hear. If these stories have unsettled you, if you feel that crawling sensation on the back of your neck, the feeling of being watched, the feeling that something is not quite right in the world around you, then you are not alone. The cases we explore on this channel are designed to remind you that darkness doesn't always announce itself. It whispers. It waits. It watches from the corners of ordinary life. It observes us in our private moments. It documents our patterns. It studies our vulnerabilities. It waits. If you're finding these stories compelling, please leave a comment below. Tell me, what disturbs you most about cases like these? Is it the unanswered questions? Is it the men who remain on the streets? Is it the possibility that we are being watched by someone we don't even know exists? Is it the realization that observation itself can be a form of violence? Or is it the fact that these men, these predators, these observers, were only caught because of chance, because of luck, because some small piece of evidence or some accidental encounter brought them to the attention of authorities? Your theories matter. Your voices matter. Don't stay silent. Share your thoughts, and let's explore this darkness together. Comment below. Tell me what you think is happening in these interrogation rooms. Tell me if you've ever felt watched. Tell me if you've ever noticed someone noticing you. Tell me your theories about what might be happening in the darkness around us. Case 3. The Contradiction. May 17th, 1980. Detective James Patterson sat across from Marcus Webb in an interrogation room in Buffalo, New York. The room was small and cramped, barely large enough for the table and 2 chairs. The walls were painted a sickly green color that had been popular in the 1960s and 70s. There was a window, but it was covered with bars and thick wire mesh. There was a mirror on one wall, and behind that mirror, other detectives and supervisors could observe. There was the smell of stale coffee and decades of human desperation. Marcus Webb was 26 years old. He was unemployed. He had a history of minor drug offenses and property crimes. He had been arrested 3 times before for shoplifting, and once for breaking and entering into a vacant house. He had spent time in juvenile detention as a teenager. He had spent time in county jail as an adult. He was, by all official measures, a small-time criminal, someone who committed crimes not out of grand ambition or elaborate planning, but out of necessity and circumstance. He was someone who stole to survive. He was someone who broke into houses looking for something he could sell for drugs. He was someone who, in the eyes of the law and society, was unlikely to ever amount to anything more than a perpetual problem. What brought Marcus Webb to this interrogation room on this specific night in 1980 was something far more serious than his previous crimes. On May 15th, 1980, the body of a young woman was found in a canal in downtown Buffalo. The canal was one of the oldest parts of the city, a remnant of the waterways that had once been the lifeblood of Buffalo's industrial economy. The body had been discovered by a maintenance worker who was surveying the canal banks for debris. The body had been in the water for approximately 3 to 4 days. The body had been badly decomposed. The body had been identified as Angela Roberts, a young woman who was 21 years old, who worked as a nurse's aide at a local hospital, who had no known connection to Marcus Webb. But when detectives were canvassing the neighborhood where Angela's body was found, they discovered that Marcus Webb lived in an apartment just 2 blocks from the canal, and when they knocked on his door to ask if he had seen anything unusual in the past week, if he had noticed anyone acting strangely, if he had any information that might help with their investigation, Marcus Webb made a decision that would lead to one of the most confusing interrogations in Buffalo Police Department history. He confessed. "I did it," Marcus Webb told the detectives at his door. I killed her. I killed Angela Roberts. Marcus Webb was arrested without incident. He did not resist. He did not run. He was cooperative. He provided detailed information about the alleged crime. He described the circumstances of the murder with precision. He described how he had allegedly met Angela at the hospital. He described how he had allegedly followed her. He described how he had allegedly lured her to the canal by offering her a ride. He described how he had allegedly killed her by striking her with a brick or a rock. He described how he had allegedly dumped her body in the water. There was only one problem. Almost everything he described was wrong. The forensic evidence from the autopsy indicated that Angela Roberts had been killed in a location other than the canal. There was no water in her lungs, indicating that she had been dead before being placed in the water. The injuries to her body were inconsistent with anything Marcus had described. The autopsy indicated that she had been struck with blunt force trauma, but the angle of the wounds, the depth of the wounds, the specific characteristics of the trauma all suggested that the weapon used was different from a brick or a rock. The wounds suggested a smaller object. The wounds suggested repeated, methodical strikes. The wounds suggested someone who had time and deliberation. Furthermore, the toxicology report from Angela's body indicated the presence of a specific combination of drugs, diazepam and chloral hydrate, a combination that would have been nearly impossible to administer without leaving evidence of injection or ingestion. Marcus Webb did not have these drugs in his possession or in his apartment. There was no evidence of him ever having access to these drugs. The drugs were relatively uncommon in 1980. They were typically prescribed under specific circumstances. They were not the kinds of drugs that someone like Marcus Webb would typically have access to. Additionally, Angela Roberts' work schedule and the time of her death, according to the coroner, meant that she would have been murdered during the hours when Marcus Webb had actually been somewhere else, documented by multiple witnesses and security camera footage from a grocery store, where he had been shopping for groceries on the afternoon in question. But Marcus Webb would not recant his confession. "I did it," he maintained, even as the evidence mounted against his confession. "I killed Angela Roberts. I'm guilty. I'm guilty of her death." Detective James Patterson was puzzled. He had been a detective for 18 years. He had seen many things in those 18 years. He had seen killers who confessed in full detail, and whose confessions matched the evidence perfectly. He had seen killers who lied constantly and changed their stories with every interrogation session. He had seen killers who were genuinely remorseful, who wept during their confessions, who expressed genuine horror at what they had done. He had seen killers who showed no remorse whatsoever, who seemed almost proud of their crimes. But he had never seen someone like Marcus Webb, a man who was clearly lying about a murder, a man whose confession contradicted all available physical evidence, a man who was clearly not the actual killer, but who would not stop insisting that he was guilty. The interrogation, which extended over 3 separate sessions spanning 2 weeks, is recorded in the police archives. The beginning of the interrogation contains Detective Patterson attempting to break down Marcus's confession and get him to admit that he is lying. "Marcus," Detective Patterson says, and his voice is patient but firm, the voice of a man who has done this many times before. According to the autopsy, Angela Roberts was killed somewhere else. She was not killed at the canal. "I killed her somewhere else," Marcus insists. "I killed her at my apartment." "We've examined your apartment, Marcus. There's no evidence of murder there. There's no blood. There's no forensic evidence of any kind. How did you clean it up without leaving any trace?" "I'm very careful," Marcus says. "I cleaned everything. I cleaned the walls. I cleaned the floor. I cleaned the ceiling. I cleaned every surface." "With what? What cleaning materials did you use?" "Bleach. I used bleach. Lots of bleach. We found no traces of bleach in your apartment. We found no evidence that bleach was purchased by you recently. Your credit card and check records show no recent purchases of cleaning supplies. I bought it a long time ago," Marcus says. "I don't remember when. Maybe a year ago. Maybe 2 years ago. I don't remember." Detective Patterson continues with this line of questioning for hours, and each time he presents evidence that contradicts Marcus's confession. Marcus simply adjusts his story. Each time Detective Patterson points out a factual impossibility, Marcus finds a new explanation that is equally impossible. Each time Detective Patterson corners him with logic and evidence, Marcus retreats to a different version of his confession that is equally flawed and equally unconvincing. But what is truly disturbing about the interrogation occurs during the second session, approximately 1 week after the initial questioning. At this point, Marcus's story has been proven false in every significant detail. The physical evidence proves he is not the killer. The witness testimony places him elsewhere. The forensic evidence is entirely incompatible with his confession. The toxicology evidence makes no sense in connection with someone like Marcus. Everyone involved in the investigation understands that Marcus Webb did not kill Angela Roberts. Yet Marcus continues to insist that he did. Yet Marcus refuses to recant. Yet Marcus seems almost desperate to maintain his false confession, as if something terrible will happen if he admits the truth. "Marcus," Detective Patterson says during the second session, and his voice is tired, frustrated, confused. "I need you to be honest with me. Did you kill Angela Roberts?" "Yes," Marcus says immediately. "I don't think you did. I think you're lying. I think you're confessing to a murder you didn't commit, and I need to know why." "I killed her," Marcus insists. "How did you kill her?" Marcus is quiet for a moment, and then he says something that causes Detective Patterson's entire demeanor to shift. Something that causes the detective to lean back in his chair. Something that causes Detective Patterson's hand to move toward a button on the wall, a button that would alert the supervisors behind the mirror that something unusual is happening in the interrogation room. "I strangled her," Marcus says. "I strangled her with my hands." "You strangled her?" "But the autopsy indicated that she was poisoned. The autopsy indicated that there were ligature marks around her neck that occurred after death. The autopsy indicated that she was not strangled while alive. The ligature marks indicated that something, possibly a rope or a cord or a wire, was applied to her neck after she was already dead." Marcus's eyes flicker. It's a small movement, barely noticeable. But Detective Patterson, who has studied interrogation techniques for nearly 2 decades, catches it. Detective Patterson sees, in that moment, that Marcus knows something. Detective Patterson sees that Marcus has just realized something. Detective Patterson sees that Marcus has been caught in a contradiction. "How did you know?" Detective Patterson says slowly, carefully, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What the autopsy indicated. How did you know that there were ligature marks that occurred after death? That information was not released to the public. I never told you that information. No one told you that information. How did you know about the ligature marks?" Marcus does not answer. He simply stares at the table in front of him. His hands are trembling. His breathing has become rapid and shallow. "Marcus, how did you know about the ligature marks? How did you know that they occurred after death?" I must have read it somewhere," Marcus says weakly. I don't know. I don't know how I knew." "Where? Where did you read it?" "It wasn't released to the media. It wasn't mentioned in the newspaper. It wasn't discussed on the radio. The only people who knew about the ligature marks were the coroner, the coroner's assistant, the detectives on the case, and the actual killer." "How did you know?" "I don't remember. I don't know." "You don't remember, but you knew. You knew a very specific detail about the crime that only the actual killer would know. You knew that Angela had ligature marks around her neck that were applied after death. You knew that the strangulation you described couldn't have happened. You knew that your entire confession was false, yet you're still maintaining that you're guilty. Why? Why are you lying about a murder you didn't commit?" And this is when Marcus Webb does something that Detective Patterson will never fully understand. He looks up. He makes direct eye contact with Detective Patterson, and he smiles. The smile is not the smile of someone who is relieved to be caught in their lie. The smile is not the smile of someone who is experiencing some kind of psychological breakdown. The smile is something else entirely. It's the smile of someone who has just made a decision. It's the smile of someone who has just accepted something terrible. "Maybe I was there," Marcus says quietly, and his voice is different now. His voice is more controlled. His voice is almost calm. "Maybe I was there and I'm just confused about what I did. Maybe I was there when she was killed, and I'm just not remembering correctly. Maybe someone else killed her, and I was just there. Maybe I'm guilty of something else. Maybe I'm guilty of being a witness." You're not confused, Marcus. You're lying. You're confessing to a murder you didn't commit. The question is why? Why are you doing this? Why are you claiming to have killed someone you didn't kill? Marcus does not answer. He simply continues to smile. The third interrogation session occurs 1 week later. At this point, it has become clear that Marcus Webb is not the murderer. The physical evidence is simply too incompatible. The detective's office has begun investigating other leads. The actual killer remains unknown. Marcus has been advised by his court-appointed attorney to stop confessing and to request legal representation and to stop speaking to police. Marcus has refused, Marcus has insisted on continuing the interrogations. In this third session, Detective Patterson adopts a different strategy. Rather than trying to break down Marcus's confession with evidence and logic, he simply listens. He allows Marcus to talk. He allows Marcus to tell his false story in whatever detail Marcus chooses. He allows Marcus to reveal what is actually going on in his mind. "Tell me about Angela," Detective Patterson says. "Tell me everything about Angela. Tell me how you know about her." And Marcus does. He provides extensive details about Angela Roberts. He describes her appearance, her dark hair, her brown eyes, her tendency to wear a particular style of cardigan. He describes her job at the hospital, her schedule, the ward where she worked, the patients she cared for, her colleagues' names, their personalities. He describes her daily routine, her morning wake-up time, her breakfast, the route she walked to work, the coffee shop where she stopped for coffee before work, the time she clocked in, the time she clocked out, the restaurants where she ate lunch, the stores where she shopped, the route she walked home, the television shows she watched. He describes the clothes she wore on specific days. He describes the books she was reading. He describes personal details about her life that would be known only to someone who was very close to her, or to someone who had spent significant time observing her. All of these details are accurate. All of these details are the kind of information that could only be obtained by direct interaction with Angela, or by watching someone. All of these details are the kind of information that a stalker or an observer or a close friend might collect. But Marcus Webb did not know Angela Roberts. The investigation had determined that they had no connection to each other. They had never met. There was no evidence of any interaction between them. They did not have mutual friends. They did not work at the same locations. They did not share any social circles. Yet Marcus Webb knew things about Angela Roberts that only someone who had spent significant time observing her would know, or someone who had been told about her by someone else, someone who had access to information about her, someone who had collected information about her. Detective Patterson finally asks the question that is the most disturbing question in the entire interrogation record, the question that seems almost casual in its phrasing, but which contains the weight of something much larger, something much darker. "Marcus," he says, and his voice is careful now, cautious, as if he is approaching something dangerous, something that should not be disturbed. "Did someone send you? Did someone send you to confess to this murder?" Marcus's expression changes. It's subtle, but it's noticeable. For a moment, he looks frightened. For a moment, the facade of the calm confessor drops away. For a moment, something real appears in his eyes. "I can't say," Marcus whispers, and his whisper is urgent, desperate, as if he is trying to communicate something important within the limited time he has. "If I say, he'll know." He watches the police station. He watches the interrogation rooms. He has people who report to him. He has people everywhere. Who, Marcus? Who is watching the police station? Who has people reporting to him? I can't say his name. If I say his name, he'll know. And he'll do to me what he did to Angela. And he'll do to you what he did to Angela. And he'll do to all of us what he did to Angela. What did he do to Angela, Marcus? He killed her, Marcus says, and his voice is becoming more urgent, more desperate, more honest than anything he has said in the entire interrogation. He poisoned her. He put the drugs in her. He strangled her. He put her in the water. And then he told me to confess. He told me that if I confessed, he would let me live. He told me that if I didn't confess, he would come find me. He told me that he knows where I live. He told me that he knows my mother's address. He told me that he knows my sister's schedule. He told me that he's been watching all of us. And he told me that if I didn't confess to killing Angela, he would kill my mother. He would kill my sister. He would kill everyone I know. Where does this man live, Marcus? Where would we find him? Give me an address. Give me a name. Give me something. Everywhere, Marcus says. He lives everywhere. He's in the walls. He's in the parking lots. He's watching the windows. He knows when the detectives leave. He knows when the detectives come back. He knows the times that the station is least populated. He knows the shifts of the security guards. He knows the procedures for storing evidence. He knows everything. Marcus, is this man real? Are you making this up? Are you hallucinating? Are you suffering from a mental illness? He's real, Marcus insists. And his desperation is real now. His fear is real. His knowledge of something is real. He's more real than anything else. He's the most real person in the entire world. He's the only real person. Everyone else is pretending. Everyone else is playing a role. But he's real. He knows. He sees. He watches. The interrogation ends shortly after this. Detective Patterson, realizing that he is no longer dealing with a straightforward case of false confession, realizes that he is dealing with something far stranger, realizes that Marcus is genuinely terrified of someone, realizes that Marcus has been threatened by someone, calls an end to the session. Marcus Webb is charged with obstruction of justice and perjury, not for the murder itself, but for his false confession and for refusing to cooperate with a legitimate investigation. He is sentenced to 2 years in a psychiatric facility for evaluation and treatment. While in the psychiatric facility, Marcus provides no new information about the mysterious figure he described. He does not recant his false confession. He does not name the man he claims is watching the police station. He spends his 2 years in the facility on antipsychotic medications. Medications that are supposed to help him distinguish between reality and hallucination. But according to the psychiatrists who treat him, Marcus never truly believes that the figure is a hallucination. Marcus never truly accepts that his experiences are products of mental illness. Marcus seems to know something that he will not or cannot share. The murder of Angela Roberts remains officially unsolved. What makes this case truly disturbing is this. 1 week after Marcus Webb provided his description of the mysterious figure who supposedly killed Angela Roberts and ordered him to confess, 2 separate detectives from the Buffalo Police Department reported that they had felt followed while leaving the station. They reported seeing a figure moving through the parking lot who seemed to be watching them with focused intensity. They reported that when they tried to pursue the figure, demanding identification, the figure moved with an almost inhuman speed and vanished into the darkness. They reported that in the days following this encounter, they began to experience a crushing sense of dread, a sense that they had been marked, a sense that they had been studied, a sense that they were being prepared for something. The reports were filed and subsequently forgotten or lost. Marcus Webb served his time in the psychiatric facility and was released in 1983. He worked various low-wage jobs in Buffalo for the remainder of his life. He never again made contact with law enforcement. He lived alone. He had minimal contact with his family. He seemed to be hiding from something. He seemed to be hiding from someone. He died in 1998 in a low-income housing facility. The cause was listed as a drug overdose, though friends of Marcus insisted that he had been clean for years, that he had never relapsed into drug use after his release from the psychiatric facility, that someone must have forced the drugs into him. But the official cause of death remains a drug overdose. The case is considered closed. No one will ever know if Marcus Webb was a genuinely confused individual who fabricated an elaborate fantasy to avoid responsibility for a crime he didn't commit. No one will ever know if Marcus was genuinely hallucinating and experiencing a psychotic break. No one will ever know if Marcus was actually pressured into a false confession by someone he was genuinely terrified of. The physical evidence will never explain how Marcus Webb knew such specific details about Angela Roberts. The interrogation records will never clarify whether the mysterious figure he described was real or an elaborate fiction. And the murder of Angela Roberts will remain, now more than 40 years later, one of Buffalo's most perplexing unsolved crimes. A young woman whose killer was never found. A young woman whose final days were documented by someone who cared enough to watch her, to study her, to know every detail of her life. A young woman who was murdered by someone who knew her so completely that they understood exactly how to kill her. These are the disturbing things that emerge from police interrogation records, not the obvious confessions, not the clear-cut cases where guilt is immediately apparent, but rather the moments where nothing makes sense. The moments where the accused knows things they shouldn't know. The moments where guilty parties go free and innocent people confess. The moments where detectives realize that the darkness they're chasing is far more complex and far more vast than they ever understood. These are the cases that haunt the men and women who investigated them. These are the cases that never leave you. These are the cases that change the way you see the world. If you enjoyed these cases, if they've left you unsettled and questioning the nature of the world around you, then I ask you to do something before this video ends. Comment below. Tell me which case disturbed you most. Tell me your theory about what was really happening in these interrogation rooms. Tell me if you think these people were actually guilty of something, even if they weren't guilty of the murders they confessed to. Tell me if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain. Tell me if you've ever felt watched. Tell me if you've ever encountered something that contradicted all logic and reason. Your stories matter. Your theories matter. In the comments, we are all witnesses to the darkness together. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new case. so you never miss a new exploration into the unknown. Share this video with someone who enjoys exploring the darkness, someone who doesn't look away from the hard truths, someone who is willing to question what we think we know. Because the more people who are aware of these stories, the more people who are questioning the nature of reality and the hidden mechanisms that might be governing our world, the more people who are paying attention to the darkness around us, the closer we come to understanding the truth. And understanding the truth is the only way to prepare ourselves for what might be waiting in that darkness. And here is the truth that I want to leave you with, the truth that haunts everyone who investigates these cases for long enough. The night has not yet ended. The fear is still real, and the truth remains, as always, just out of reach. This is Yunjin Lee. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.